It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Our tiny apartment smells like burnt microwave popcorn and whatever cologne Rayan decided to spray on himself after his shower, which, by the way, was way too much. The kind of cologne that doesn't just enter a room, it invades it, it occupies it. It makes you feel things you weren't prepared to feel at 11:47 on a Tuesday. And there, I was sitting on the floor of our shared living room with a measuring tape in my hand, because, and I cannot stress this enough, I was trying to figure out if his new couch would fit through our front door. That's it, that's the measuring, the couch. His beloved, ridiculously oversized, vintage brown leather couch that he had been obsessing over for literally 6 weeks straight. But here's the thing about that moment that I didn't understand yet. Here's what I couldn't possibly have known as I sat there on that scratchy carpet, yellow measuring tape stretched across the floor, pretending to focus on numbers. That night was the beginning of the end of the person I thought I was. And the beginning of everything I'd been too scared to become. So sit down, get comfortable, get your blanket, get your tea, get whatever you need, because this is not a short story. This is not a quick little "we fell in love" the end. This is a story about fear and silence and the unbearable weight of a feeling you've been carrying so long you forgot you were even holding it. This is a story about what happens when two people orbit each other for so long that eventually, gravity wins. My name is Zane, I'm 24 years old. I grew up in a house where feelings were kept neat and small, like folded laundry you never took out of the drawer. I am terrible at cooking, but I make excellent playlists. I cry at commercials. I once spent 40 minutes deciding whether to text someone back haha or lol. I am, in every measurable way, a disaster of a human being. And this is the truest thing I've ever told anyone. It started, as most disasters do, with a desperate Craigslist ad. I was 22. I had just started my second year of graduate school, urban planning, very sexy I know, and my previous roommate, a well-meaning but absolutely chaotic man named Declan, had decided to move back home to Cork, Ireland with approximately 12 hours of notice and a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Sorry mate, missed the rain, you can have my blender." The blender didn't work. So there I was, 1 month into a semester I could barely afford, in an apartment I definitely couldn't afford alone, posting a roommate ad at midnight with the kind of frantic energy that only comes from doing math you don't want to do. The ad was simple. I needed someone clean, quiet, employed, and capable of buying their own toilet paper without being reminded. I listed the room, the rent, the neighborhood. I added one line at the bottom that I almost deleted 3 times before leaving in, LGBTQ plus friendly space. Those 4 words, I had no idea what they would bring me. Rayan messaged me at 7:15 the next morning. I remember because I was still half asleep, phone face down on my pillow, and I had this weird dream about trying to catch a train that kept moving its departure platform. I picked up my phone expecting an email from my thesis advisor. Instead, I got this. "Hi, saw your listing. Graduate student software engineering. Clean, quiet, employed. I also have a really large couch. Is that a deal breaker? Serious question." I stared at that message for a full 30 seconds. Then I laughed out loud alone in my messy bed at 7:15 in the morning. This stranger and his couch had made me laugh before I'd even had coffee. I typed back, "Depends on the couch, how large are we talking?" He replied with a photo. It was an enormous worn leather sectional that looked like it had been stolen from the waiting room of a very expensive therapist. Dark brown, low-backed, clearly vintage. And it was, without question, the most beautiful piece of furniture I'd ever seen. "That's obscene," I wrote back. "I know," he said, "but I love it and it comes with me." "Fine, when can you come see the place?" He came that afternoon, and I want to be very clear about something. When I opened the door and saw Rayan for the first time, I did not feel anything romantic. I want to be honest about that because this story isn't about love at first sight. It's about something much slower, much quieter, and in my opinion, much more terrifying than that. What I felt when I opened the door was simply, oh, a person. He was tall, not dramatically so, but enough that he had to shift slightly when he stepped through the doorframe. Dark hair that was doing something loosely chaotic on top. A worn olive green jacket over a plain white t-shirt. He was holding a reusable coffee cup and looking at the apartment hallway with the expression of someone genuinely trying to assess whether they could be happy somewhere. "Zane," he said. "Yeah, Rayan." "Yeah." We shook hands, his was warm. I noticed that the way you notice weather automatically without deciding to. He looked around the apartment with quiet, careful attention. He asked about the water pressure. He asked which direction the bedroom window faced east. He nodded like that was the right answer. He crouched down to look at the baseboards, which I later learned was a thing he did because he was apparently traumatized by a previous apartment that had a mouse problem. Then he walked to the center of the living room and stood there for a moment. "The couch will go here," he said, not asking, just knowing. "Sure," I said. He nodded once, looked at me and said, "I'd like the room if you'll have me." I said yes. 3 weeks later he moved in, and he brought that couch, and it took us 45 minutes and a moment of genuine furniture-related crisis to get it through the front door, but it made it, and from that day forward it anchored the entire living room like it had always belonged there. Like it had been waiting. Here's what I didn't expect about living with Rayan. I didn't expect how easy it would be. I had lived with roommates before. I knew the patterns, the passive-aggressive notes about dishes, the territorial behavior around shelf space in the fridge, the delicate negotiations over thermostat temperature like your two countries establishing a border treaty. Rayan was none of that. He was quiet in the mornings, not the cold, closed-off kind of quiet, but the kind that felt like he was simply still inside himself, not ready to be loud yet, and that was okay. He made coffee before I was awake, and he always made enough for two, not because he asked if I wanted some, just because that was what he did, 2 cups, every morning, like I was already factored into his equation. He cooked on Sundays, actual cooking, not reheated, not ordered, not assembled from a meal kit. He would spread things out across the kitchen counter with a kind of focused calm that I found, inexplicably, fascinating to watch. He made lamb with pomegranate and rice dishes that smelled like somewhere else, somewhere warm, like the memory of a place I'd never been but somehow recognized. He always made too much. He always left a plate in the fridge with a piece of tape that said, "Zane, eat this." I always ate it. He worked late. Software engineering meant that some nights I'd be in bed by 11 and I'd still hear his keyboard, this soft, rhythmic clicking from across the hall, like rain on a window. Steady and distant and honestly kind of comforting in a way I couldn't articulate and therefore refused to examine. He laughed easily. That was the thing about Rayan that I noticed early and kept noticing. The way you keep noticing a song that's been playing in a different room, you don't realize how often you're hearing it until it stops. He laughed at things that weren't that funny. Not a performance laugh, not a polite laugh, but a genuine, almost surprised laugh, like the world kept delighting him in small ways he hadn't anticipated. I'm not a person who laughs easily. I have been told I am intense. I have been told I think too much. I have been told by more than one person in my life that I am a lot. Rayan never said any of those things. He just existed alongside me in the easy way that good furniture exists in a room. You stop noticing it consciously, but the room would be completely wrong without it. By November, 2 months in, we had a routine that neither of us had planned or discussed. It had simply evolved the way moss grows, slowly, quietly, in the direction of whatever it needed. Wednesday nights we watched something on TV together, not a scheduled thing. It just happened the first week by accident and then kept happening. He'd appear in the doorway of the living room around 9 with 2 glasses of something and say, "Anything on?" And I'd already have the remote and we'd find something and sit on that enormous couch that smelled faintly of old leather and cedar, his cedar, from whatever product he used, and we'd watch for 2 hours without talking much, and it was, without exaggeration, the most comfortable I had ever felt in the presence of another person. That should have told me something. I was not listening. So here we are, back to November, back to Tuesday night, back to the measuring tape. Let me back up slightly. Rayan had found an extension piece for his couch online, a chaise attachment that he'd been hunting for since apparently the couch was part of a set and he'd only ever had half of it. He found it at an estate sale 3 hours away, bought it over the phone, and arranged for it to be delivered that weekend. The problem was our front door. Our front door was, charitably, not designed for large furniture. We'd barely gotten the original couch in, and that was with 2 guys, a can of WD-40 on the hinges, and a brief moment where we genuinely considered whether the door itself could be temporarily removed. So that Tuesday night, Rayan had gone to shower and I, in a fit of practical helpfulness, had gotten out my measuring tape to figure out the door dimensions versus the approximate dimensions of the attachment piece, which Rayan had written on a sticky note that was now on the fridge under a magnet shaped like a cactus. I was on the floor measuring, tape stretched wall to wall, pencil behind my ear. This was the full extent of what was happening. Rayan came out of the bathroom. He was wearing those gray sweatpants. You know the ones, every gay man on earth knows the ones, and a soft, worn heather blue t-shirt that was slightly too small in a way that felt entirely accidental and therefore 10 times worse. His hair was damp and pushed back. He smelled like cedar and something clean and warm. He stopped when he saw me on the floor. "What are you doing?" he said. "Measuring," I said, and I heard it the second it came out of my mouth, the way it sounded, the way it landed. Rayan looked at me for 1 second, too, and then he started laughing, that laugh, that easy, surprised, genuine laugh. "Measuring what exactly?" he said, and there was absolutely nothing suggestive about how he said it. He was just asking a question, but my face went hot anyway. "The door," I said very firmly, holding up the measuring tape as evidence. "For your couch piece, I was trying to figure out if it'll fit." He leaned against the hallway wall and looked at me with this soft, amused expression. "You didn't have to do that." I know I was being practical. "You were being sweet," he said, simply, plainly, not like a compliment designed to land, just like a fact. He was nodding. "You were being sweet, Zane." And then he pushed off the wall and walked into the kitchen to get some water, and I just sat there on the floor, measuring tape in my lap, the number 34.5 inches written on a scrap of paper next to me, completely unable to move. Not because of what he said, not really. Because of the way my chest felt when he said it. Like something had been still for a very long time and something else had just gently knocked on it. I sat on that floor for another 10 minutes after he went to his room. The TV was off. The apartment was quiet. Outside, November was doing its thing, cold and relentless, the kind of dark that comes early and stays. And for the first time, in what I am now certain was years of not asking myself, I asked myself, "What is this?" What followed that night was approximately 3 weeks of what I can only describe as internal auditing. I began, quietly and obsessively, to take stock, to look back at 4 months of ordinary days and try to understand what I had actually been feeling versus what I had told myself I was feeling. Here is what the inventory revealed. I thought about him more than made sense for someone who was just a roommate. Not constantly, not in a dramatic, mooning over photographs way, but he appeared in my thoughts throughout the day in small, mundane ways that I had been filing under normal. I'd see something on my walk to campus and think Rayan would find that funny. I'd hear a song and think I should add this to the Wednesday playlist. I'd be sitting in a seminar on urban infrastructure and my mind would drift not to anything in particular, just to the apartment, to the sound of his keyboard, to the plate in the fridge. I had been finding reasons to be in the living room when he was there. I had not acknowledged this before, but looking back, the evidence was clear. I had suddenly become a person who spent a lot of time reading in the living room rather than in my room, which was perfectly adequate for reading and had a better lamp. I noticed everything about him, not in an intrusive way, just in the way you notice things about a place you feel safe in. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands even when it was no longer hot enough to need warming. The small line that appeared between his eyebrows when he was reading something that puzzled him. The way he always said goodbye when he left the apartment, even if I was in another room, a "see you later" called out to the general air, not demanding a response, just marking his exit, just leaving something of himself in the room before he went. I had been listening for that. I had been, every single morning for 4 months, unconsciously waiting for the sound of his door opening, unconsciously timing my appearance in the kitchen around his, unconsciously structuring my Wednesday evenings around a couch and 2 glasses and 2 hours of quiet company. Unconsciously, no. Not unconsciously, just unacknowledged. There is a difference. And here was the final, devastating item in the inventory. I was happy, more consistently, more genuinely, more quietly happy than I had been in years. My apartment was the place I most wanted to be. Home had become not just a location but a feeling, and the feeling had Rayan's cedar cologne and Wednesday nights and a ridiculous leather couch in the middle of it. I was in love with my roommate. I sat with that for a long time, in the way you sit with a diagnosis, not panicking, not celebrating, just being very still with a truth that has changed the floor plan of everything. Now here is the part of the story that isn't romantic. Here is the part that is just human and scared and real. I was terrified. Not of the feeling. The feeling, once I'd named it, had a strange warmth to it, like when you finally find the thing you've been searching for in your bag and you can stop reaching in the dark. No, I wasn't afraid of loving him. I was afraid of everything else. I was afraid of being wrong, of having constructed something out of morning coffee and shared TV and plates left in the fridge, when in reality Rayan was simply a good, kind person who was like this with everyone, and I had mistaken decency for something directed specifically at me. I was afraid of ruining it. What we had, this fragile, perfect, ordinary architecture of our days, it was the best thing in my life. If I said something, if I reached for more and he didn't feel the same, I wouldn't just lose the possibility of something more. I would lose what already existed. I would lose the Wednesdays. I would lose the plates with tape on them. I would lose him not romantically but as a presence in my daily life, because how do you keep living with someone after that? I was afraid of what I didn't know. Rayan and I had spoken in passing and in general terms about being queer. It was there in the apartment ad, it was understood, it was never a discussion because it didn't need to be. But there is an enormous distance between safe and interested. Just because someone is in the same landscape as you doesn't mean they're walking toward you. And underneath all of it, the oldest fear, the one I'd had my whole life, I was afraid of being too much, of wanting too loudly, of reaching out and finding that the space where I thought someone was standing was just air. So I did what I always do when I'm afraid. I got very quiet. I pulled slightly back. Not dramatically, I wasn't cold, I wasn't distant, I wasn't the kind of person who punishes others for feelings they don't even know they've caused. But I was more careful. I spent more evenings in my room. I let a few Wednesdays slip by with some excuse about deadlines. I started putting more distance between myself and the thing I was afraid to want. Rayan noticed. I know he noticed because Rayan was not, despite his quietness, an unobservant person. He was actually extremely observant. He was the kind of person who noticed when the energy of a room had shifted and responded to it gently, without calling it out, without demanding an explanation. One night in early December, he knocked on my bedroom door. I was at my desk pretending to work on my thesis, which was going nowhere because my brain was somewhere else entirely. "Hey," he said, "you okay?" "Yeah," I said, "just stressed, thesis stuff." He looked at me for a moment. "Okay," he said, "I made too much food again, it's in the fridge." "Thanks," I said. He started to go, then he stopped, hand on the doorframe. "Zane," he said. "Yes." A pause, long enough that I looked up from my screen. "Nothing," he said, "just I'm here if it's not just thesis stuff." And then he left. I put my head down on my desk and stayed very still for a very long time. December arrived with the kind of cold that has a personality. Not just cold air, cold with opinions, cold with conviction, the kind that pushed under doors and through window seams and made the entire city feel slightly more intimate, as if the weather was herding everyone a little closer together. We had a December tradition, Rayan and I, one we'd invented only the December before, which meant it was exactly 1 year old and already felt like it had always existed. We watched holiday films we both claimed to be too sophisticated for and ate ungodly amounts of a specific brand of caramel popcorn that Rayan had introduced me to and that I was now deeply dependent on. I was avoiding it this year, avoiding him, being careful. And then on December 14th at 8:30 in the evening, the power went out. The whole block went dark at once. One moment the apartment was lit and warm, the next it was black and very, very quiet. I heard Rayan laugh from the other room, surprised, unguarded. "Well," he called, "hello darkness." I laughed too, I couldn't help it. We found candles. Rayan had several because of course he did, because he was the kind of person who prepared for power outages and also apparently had excellent taste in candles, amber and cedar scented, which felt almost cosmically on the nose. We set them around the living room. We got the caramel popcorn. We sat on the enormous leather couch in the candlelight with a darkness outside that made the apartment feel like its own small universe, and we just talked. We talked in the way you can only talk when the usual rules of an evening are disrupted. When the screens are dark and the light is soft and time has a different texture. We talked about our families, his in Toronto, mine scattered in a way that had never quite felt like a constellation to me. We talked about what we wanted to be when we were children. He said an astronaut, then a chef, then someone who builds things, and that's basically what I do, just virtually. I said I wanted to draw maps, which, that's literally urban planning, Zane. I know, I got there. We talked about fear. Not in a directed way, not about any specific fear, just about fear as a concept, about how the things we're most afraid of tend to be the things most worth having. I don't know who led us there, I think the dark did. At some point, the conversation quieted into a comfortable silence. The candles had burned shorter, we'd finished the popcorn, somewhere outside the city hummed. Rayan said quietly, not looking at me but looking at the candle on the coffee table. Can I ask you something? Sure, I said. A pause. Have I done something? I turned to look at him. What? These last few weeks? He did look at me now, and his expression was careful, measured, but underneath it there was something that looked a lot like vulnerability. You've been different, more distant. I keep wondering if I did something or said something, and I want to know if I should fix it. The candlelight moved, the apartment was very still. You haven't done anything, I said. Then what is it? The space between us on the couch was not large, maybe 2 feet, maybe less. The kind of distance that in any other context would feel like standing next to someone at a bus stop, unremarkable, neutral, but it felt charged in a way I couldn't pretend I wasn't feeling. I started. Stopped. I'm just scared, I said, and that was all I meant to say. That was the safe version. That was the answer that communicated distress without revealing its source. But Rayan looked at me and said very gently, of what? And something about the dark, or the candles, or the fact that we'd been talking honestly for 2 hours, or the fact that I was so tired, so exhausted from carrying this quietly by myself, broke some lever in me. Of this, I said. A pause. Of this, he repeated softly, and he wasn't asking for clarification. He was saying it in the way you say a sentence back to someone when you want them to know you heard it. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Rayan reached over and picked up my hand from my lap, not dramatically, not urgently, just picked it up the way you pick up something you've been meaning to hold, and held it in both of his. His hands were warm, they were always warm. Me too, he said. That was it, 2 words in candlelight. Me too. I want to tell you that after that, everything was simple and easy, and we rode off into some kind of cinematic sunset. I want to give you the version with swelling music and a kiss in the rain. But what actually happened was, we sat like that on the couch for a long time, not saying much, until the power came back on at 10:22 and all the lights lurched back to life, and we both blinked at each other in the sudden brightness like 2 people remembering where they were. And then we both started laughing. Not at anything, just at ourselves, I think, at how long it had taken. At the sheer, specific absurdity of being 2 people who needed a power outage to finally just be honest. At the fact that we were both idiots. At the fact that it didn't matter. So, Rayan said, still smiling, still holding my hand loosely. So I said. That's been building for a while, he said. Yes, I agreed. Since when? I thought about it, the measuring tape, I think, the couch measuring that night. What about you? He tilted his head, considered. The coffee, he said. The coffee. I started making 2 cups that first week. Before I even consciously decided to, I'd be standing at the counter and I'd just make 2, and I thought, that's interesting, Rayan, and then I kept doing it and I thought, this is probably information. I started laughing again, I couldn't stop. You're telling me, I said, that you knew before I did. I didn't know, he said, grinning now. I suspected. There's a difference. You're the one who wouldn't look at me for 3 weeks. I was protecting myself, I said, mortified and delighted. From me. From wanting something I wasn't sure I could have. He looked at me when I said that. The smile softened into something quieter. You could have it, he said. You can have it. The chaise attachment arrived that Saturday. It took 30 minutes, 2 pairs of hands, a brief argument about angles, and a moment where Rayan started laughing so hard he had to put the furniture down, and I took the opportunity to lecture him about pivot points, which made him laugh harder. But it fit. Of course it fit, it was always going to fit. And when we finally wrestled it into place and the couch became complete, both halves together, the original piece and the long-missing extension, joined finally after years apart. Rayan stood back and looked at it with this expression of quiet satisfaction that I had come to recognize and treasure. Then he looked at me. Worth it, I said. Absolutely worth it, he said, and he wasn't just talking about the couch. We sat on it together that afternoon, the now complete, now perfect, enormous, ridiculous leather couch that had started everything. The couch that had been the reason for a measuring tape in a hallway at 11:47 p.m. The couch that had anchored this apartment from the day he arrived. The couch that I now understood was a metaphor so obvious I'm almost embarrassed to point it out. Some things are worth the trouble of getting them through the door. Here's the thing about this story that I've been turning over in my mind since I decided to share it. It's not really a story about romance. I mean, it is, but that's not the part that matters most to me. The part that matters most to me is the fear. I spent months carrying a feeling that was making me genuinely happy and being scared of it. Scared of being wrong. Scared of ruining things. Scared of being too much, wanting too loudly, reaching out and finding air. That fear, that specific particular fear of reaching for something true is not unique to me, and it is not unique to gay love stories. But I think for a lot of us who grew up learning to keep our feelings folded small and neat and hidden in a drawer, it has an extra layer. An extra weight. There's this thing that happens when you've spent years learning that your particular way of loving is something to be careful about. You don't just fear rejection from one person, you fear the whole architecture. You've had to fight to even get to the place where you're allowed to want something, and then when you finally want something, the fight has made you so tired that the easiest thing feels like just not reaching, just watching, just orbiting. And I am here to tell you from my own couch, which is now complete and enormous and perfect, that the orbit is not enough. It was not enough for me, and it is not enough for you either. The coffee will get cold. You deserve to drink it warm. It's almost midnight on a Tuesday. 11:47, actually, I checked. The apartment smells like the lamb dish Rayan made this afternoon and cedar and a candle he lit earlier that we keep forgetting to blow out. He is beside me on the couch. The complete, ridiculous, perfect couch. He's reading something head bent, that small line between his eyebrows that means he's puzzled and delighted in equal measure. His coffee cup is between both his palms, half cold by now, but he won't put it down. In approximately 12 minutes, he's going to look up and say, "What do you want to watch?" And I'm going to say anything and mean it completely because it doesn't matter. It has never mattered. It's never been about what's on the screen. It's been about this, exactly this. Two people in a warm apartment at nearly midnight, a completed couch, a candle burning, the sound of the city outside doing its thing, relentless, ongoing, indifferent, and inside, this small and specific warmth that neither of us reached for until we were brave enough. We are both of us brave enough now. I am 24 years old. I once sat on a floor with a measuring tape and accidentally discovered the rest of my life. I measured a couch. Everything else, I found it was already there. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who's been orbiting something they're afraid to reach for, share this with them. See you next time.